Good evening, friend. I see you've wandered into another tavern, and I can't help but wonder, what do you hope to hear from the bards this evening?
Moriden, Athluan.
Tonight, dear listeners, I tell you the tale of Moriden Stormcrown, the Dragonborn of the 4th Era.
Using his mastery of magic, Moriden faced down the Mad Mage Unknowingly and prevented him from tapping power that would have ended the world.
Bah! Master of magic indeed.
Through his cleverness, his strength of arms, and the power of his voice, he had captured the mighty Odahviing and forced it to reveal the location of dreaded Alduin.
Stepping through the veil, he entered the hallowed halls of Sovngarde itself and battled the World Eater, destroying the beast and saving all of Nirn for a second time.
Not that anyone noticed at the time. I sometimes wonder why I bothered.
Now, top off your ales and listen as I tell of his time among the mighty companions of Skyrim and his rise to power as their harbinger.
You have got to be kidding me. There is almost no chance that they know what happened among the companions, let alone all the time I spent gathering political power to myself. No, they have it all wrong. You, though, you seem almost desperate to hear the story. What is it you are looking for, I wonder? Well, since you want the story so bad and we seem to have time, why not order us a couple of drinks and I'll tell you the truth of that time. The truth, mind you. Not that drivel that bard up there is embarrassing themselves with. Because the truth... the truth is not what the bards would have you believe. "15 Morning Star, 4th Era, 202. I didn't really think about it, but I've not seen a single one of the Dove since Alduin's defeat and the departure of Paarthurnax. I had more or less decided that they must have all left, really, but this morning I was forced to reconsider that. On the road south out of Windhelm, what would show up, of course, but a young Dove who thought to make a name for itself? That, of course, wasn't how it turned out for him. I almost felt bad for how easily it was destroyed. Reaching the supposed site of the Mazulft missing area, I dropped off of Arvak and started to poke around in a few likely places. It didn't take long to find the top of an archway, obviously Dwemer in origin. Several hours later, with a real shovel in my hands, which I think would shock the guild if they had seen it, I had cleared enough rock, soil, and debris to open up the entrance enough to enter it. Nothing world-shaking, unfortunately. As it had been attached to a storehouse, I shouldn't be surprised that it was a storehouse. So while I did get a number of things to sell off, I'm not entirely sure that it was worth my time. Going over my list of explorer's tools, I found one that I am genuinely unsure would go well. another journal of Sanamia. This one was supposedly left behind in a cave in Dayspring Pass, under Dawnguard Castle. Now, while officially the Dawnguard have ceased their chasing of me as a vampire, a lot of them still hold grudges. Though I have simply walked into the castle before, that was with vampiric powers. I don't have those anymore, so I wasn't sure how difficult it would be to perform that feat again. Very easy, as it turned out. I waltzed through the front door, through the main floor of the castle, and down into the cave with no problems at all, which just left the cave itself to explore and the journal to locate. 16 Morningstar, 4th Era, 202. It took some time, but I found my way through several rounds of puzzles involving archery and speed. The latter I was able to deal with easily, as I imagine many would be able to if they've been adventuring for a month or two. And the archery was academic for me at this point. The journal supposes that there is likely a treasure trove left behind near Fort Frostmoth on Solstheim. Apart from a cult that keeps sending people to me to die, I've no reason to go there. The island is all but a wasteland, and though it might be my ancestral home, I've no real connection to the island. This doesn't make this a waste of time, but it certainly isn't something I will be chasing anytime soon. After making my way out of the fort and Dayspring Pass, I turned to locating the excavation site that Mirazi had described to me. The path was in the southern rift, beginning at a place called Darklight Tower. Several rainy hours later, I located the place at the foot of a near sheer mountain wall. After one look at the place, I knew sleep would be needed before entering. I trust that the excavation team found some way to clear out this tower, but I'm not counting on it, past experience being what it is. I'm not going to ascend without first making sure I'm at least closer to my best than I am now. A few hours should be all I need. Women. Lots and lots of women, and all of them trying to kill me. This isn't Dibella's temple, and the Hagraven altar gave me a good idea of what was happening here. I am very shocked to see all of this. After all, didn't Aryan and the others go through here recently? Although I suppose it's possible that these all arrived after they went through. I do find that unlikely. Did they use another way up and simply neglect to tell me of it? If so, I will have to have very stern words for the members of the guild about deliberately endangering their guildmaster. On reaching the top, I emerged into daylight once again. The ruins at the top of the tower were no less cleared than the tower itself had been, and I was fortunate to have been trying to stay in the shadows. The weather helped significantly with that, and when a single hag and a full hagraven appeared, it was the work of only 2 arrows to clear the tops. The final obstacles to the path to Arkund and the rest of the expedition was a switch on a wall, which I pulled. They had better hope, all of them, that these hags had moved in after they went through the tower themselves, or there will be oblivion to pay. This high up a mountain in the middle of winter, and we were all shivering. More so than I'd expected. Then someone realized that, perhaps, letting a wisp mother and its pet wisps float around the camp was likely also a bad idea. Once we dealt with that, it was still cold. But it wasn't as cold. Mirazi was pleased to hear about the first outpost being completed, and Aryan was pleased to see me arrive and hear about some of the new things that will be ready for the museum when he gets back. And with that, we settled down to the business of the excavation, starting with me finding a good site to start the dig itself. Though Mirazi gave me a tool, I can't say I used it. Why bother, when the obvious and logical place was the Dwemer Dome entry at the top of the nearby rise? I marked it, reported it, and went to sleep. Though I'm usually loath to do manual labor, I'll join the crews in the morning after some real sleep. I don't relish having to go up and down that tower several times to keep abreast of things here, so I suppose I will just have to help speed things along. 17 Morningstar, 4th Era, 202. 12 hours I spent at the pick and shovel with the rest of the expedition. Conversations were had, and though I doubt I'll ever call any of these genuine friends, there is at least a better understanding of each other. A few laughs along the way were had as well, and though it was hard work, it at least seemed to go quickly. Which is why we were able to figure out that the site was of no use to us. No entrance to be found. Which somewhat implies that perhaps I should have used the tool after all. I retrieved it from Mirazi and, using the tool this time, found another likely spot for excavating. As yesterday, I planned to sleep through the night before lending my muscles. This was when things went strange. As I turned away from Mirazi, I was startled by the sight of a man racing into the camp, blood leaking from between his hands. He was incoherent, but he shoved a gem fragment into my hands before he fell over, dead. Not that I had time to check, as he was followed into camp by a trio of what we were determined, after the fight was over, to be Morag Tong assassins. Not even Dark Brotherhood. Morag Tong. The letter on the first dead man didn't make much sense to me, and for the moment Aryan is nowhere to be found. Seems he's on a supply run to Riften at the moment. I'll have to catch him when I can to see if he can make any sense of this. 18 Morningstar, 4th Era, 202. Another wasted day. Though there were several smaller items found at the second site, there was nothing indicating a way to enter the ruins proper. I went through the process of locating another dig site and was unhappy to note that the survey tool pointed me to a place where we had been, dumping all of the bodies. I marked it, I hauled all of the bodies away from it. The others started digging. Again, I will likely join in the morning, but if this one isn't the way in, then I'm leaving them to it, and will wait for them to send word that they have found an entrance. As for Aryan, still no sign. Given how Riften can be sometimes, I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised. 19 Morningstar, 4th Era, 202. Early on in the digging process, we realized this one was different. After a few hours, it was clear that this was the entrance we had been searching for, buried beneath an avalanche, likely at the time of the eruption of the Red Mountain or one of the follow-on earthquakes, Mirazi surmises. Tired I might be, but after 3 days of digging, I'm ready for some exploration, and so too are the guild, who will be following me inside. Emphasis on following. Hopefully at a sufficient distance that they don't interfere with me if I end up having to fight something. Naturally, this is also when Aryan returned, and there just isn't time to go into it all with him now. That whole thing will need to wait until this is all over. The passages were well preserved and quite clearly Dwemer in origin. A nearly intact Dwemer ruin, complete with Falmer, is near impossible to find, and yet, here one was. After dealing with the Falmer, the others could barely keep themselves quiet as they speculated on what they saw, what was meant by things. For example, the large artesian quarters, where normally only 3 or 4 Dwemer master architects would be housed, was clearly large enough for near a dozen of them. This site is clearly of major importance, though what exactly we found has yet to be revealed. Slightly further on, our path was blocked by a locked gate. In the center of the room, there was a large pit with some object on a pedestal at its bottom. Sliding down would be safe enough, and while I did that and retrieved the object below, because of course that would be me, they would get a rope ready to drag me back up. The rope proved to be unneeded. As soon as I pulled the cog out of the pedestal, the entire pit was filled with water, making the entire process far simpler. I have to wonder what the point of that was. Defense? A game? We'll likely never know. The door did open as well, so we continued onwards. As usual, the Falmer were building their homes onto the existing Dwemer structures. Not wanting to leave anything behind, I checked behind every door. and when we reached one that seemed, even to the rest of the guild, to be ominous, they remained behind while I investigated. After a quick look at the room, I think they made the better choice. I pulled the lever, since there seemed nothing else to do in this room, despite the fact that it was almost certainly a trap. A moment later, I changed my opinion. It was most certainly a trap. Platforms rotated and extended from the walls, and I felt the grate beneath my feet begin to retract into the walls. And that meant lava would be beneath my feet. I would dearly love to meet the Dwemer who designed this trap so that I could tell him in loving and exacting detail how much I hated having to jump from platform to platform heading upwards in a bid to stay ahead of the rising lava below me. In what existence would such be needed? What could possibly be up at the top that needed such athleticism to complete? The answer was another cog key, giving me two, one in water, another at the top of fire. What's next, wind and earth? Actually, I'm not sure I want that answer. Fortunately, once the cog was retrieved, the lava receded and the grates went back into place. So the worst danger on my return was gravity, which almost claimed me twice. I am really starting to detest the Dwemer. The Dwemer and their love for puzzles never ceases to irritate. After further searching the site, we found another room that seemed dedicated to the idea of messing with one's logical abilities. Though fortunately this one is themed around neither earth nor air, it still took some time to work out what the point of the 12 buttons and the massive sculpture pieces in the center of the room were supposed to be. In time, though, we figured it out. When the buttons were pressed, we were moving these pieces and creating a giant cog sculpture that, in turn, yielded a third plinth with a third cog key. Having passed a door that had 3 places for cogs, I, and the others, I suppose, are certain that these will open the way further in. That, however, will have to wait for tomorrow morning. I'm calling it a day. Setting up a camp at the bottom of the largest room so far. I could wish they'd all just wait behind me in the exterior camp, but it can't be helped. At least if we attract former attention tonight, they'll be more likely to get hurt before I am. 20 Morning Star, 4th Era, 202. One of the levers we pulled last night opened a new room on the top level of the room that we had slept in last night. Entering it was entertaining. For whatever reason, Latoria started chattering about being afraid of everything, which set the others off trying to calm her, and for a few moments it even looked like she might have been right when the rows of braziers on either side of us started to come alight on their own. And of course, there was the giant Dwemer sculpture head that appeared from nothing, accompanied by an echoing voice warning us to depart. Aryan was all but laughing at those, recognizing it all as a way to scare off potential tomb robbers, which in a way I suppose we are. Loads of nice goodies later, and I found something that was genuinely useful, I think. A cube that looks like it would fit 1 or 2 places I have seen so far, notably the door below the cogwheel lock. Oh yes, forgot about that. We placed the cog keys this morning as well, though we didn't see anything else change. This cube had better be what we need, or we're unlikely to be moving forward anytime soon. The cube did as I expected. The room that followed featured a central table of a type I have seen elsewhere, which means I am almost certain that it will create a stairway around it. Once I have the sphere I need, of course, one that, likely, is in the middle of the maze that Aryan has referred to as Karagas's maze, infamous, apparently, though I've never heard of it until now. Apart from Kaya, the rest are turning back to move the main camp to this site. The pair of us will start working our way into the maze, looking either for a way through or for a way to open the stairway outside of it. I hate mazes. No, not as much as the cold, but they are up there on the list. All day it took, I think. But we were eventually able to make our way out of the maze. and can see another one from our overlook. I have no idea how to retrace our steps back to the main camp now. So we are more or less committed to figuring this new maze out as well, though I'll be looking for another passage heading back. There is still that Dwemer table mechanism, and I know it has a stairway down involved. So there is a good possibility, I think, that there might be a way to shortcut the maze entirely. Unless the Dwemer saw walking mazes as a major form of entertainment? It took another 2 hours to make my way through what turned out to be a far simpler maze. Rather than the three-dimensional nightmare that was the first maze, it was a more standard maze that I could use standard maze-solving techniques to make my way through. Namely, pick a wall and stick to it, no matter how much backtracking that ended up requiring. My reward for leaving the maze was a pathway leading up to a platform before a tower I had seen in the distance, and a massive Dwemer construct. Unlike the other such that I am familiar with, this one was forged in the form of a female. Now, lest you think that perhaps this meant it was in some way less deadly, let us recall that in nature it is often the females you need to be the most careful of. I applied my stated precautionary measure of placing arrows into it until it stopped moving before approaching. After opening the door to the tower itself, I began to understand. This Karaga, whoever he was, apparently liked his privacy. Leaving aside the remote location built into a massive wall of mountain rock, he had not one, but 2 mazes to prevent people from just dropping in, and then left that massive construct outside to dissuade the most persistent of visitors. All of that to protect... well, I believe this was his home. Certainly it has all the markings of one, and rather reminds me of the safe house, really. If the safe house was created by Dwemer, and you have several 100,000 tons of stone just lying around and nothing to do with it at all. With that appearance, and after a quick run around, no indication of further defenders, I set up camp. Though Kaya and myself didn't spend any time really speaking, I did not find his company irritating. This is likely because he said nothing at all. The best kind of silence. 21 Morning Star, 4th Era, 202. The pair of us continued our explorations in the morning. After descending another flight of stairs, we found ourselves looking out on the Skyrim landscape. There was even a landing here that I think might be accessible to the Devaveza. This might make Arkund a good place to move my own residence to rather than continue to feed off the museum and its safe house. Assuming we find a way to get back into contact with the rest of the guild. That being decided as the next step, we started searching for a way back to the beginning of the maze. The Dwemer might like his privacy, but I can't imagine that he loved mazes enough to run them every time he came home, or more importantly, left. There were 2 machines that appeared to still be working. The first, one that I had seen yesterday when I first entered the tower, was loud, buzzing, and frankly scared me to even think of touching. The second, on the floor near the exit to the exterior, was far quieter. The crystals reminded me of the focusing crystals in the Sky Dome locations I've seen, and before it lay what appeared to be a control cube. That one seemed, of the 2, the better choice to try interacting with. Touching it, and I was suddenly in another room with the exact same setup, though the door was different. Exiting that, I knew where I was. The bottom of the stairway I had been looking for since I entered the maze. A button press, and the stairs fell into place, and the expedition above had minor heart attacks. A quick round of reunion later, I led them back to the tower through the far less confusing and safer way. The return trip was quick, and watching Madras need to lift his jaw off the floor every few feet was at least somewhat amusing. How the tower will be used is still up in the air, but for the moment all its contents need to be identified and catalogued, none of which requires my own attendance. The guild will return to Solitude soon, hopefully with an explanation of what that first machine was. Madras didn't attempt to explain it, but much of it went straight over my head. Dwemer experts tend to get excited and skip steps in explanations, I have noticed. I returned to the exterior platform and walked up the stairway. If this was going to be a potential docking place for the Aveza, I may as well look it over first, ensure that it can get close enough. At the top, the landing seemed large enough, and I'd almost turned around to leave when I noticed another button. I paused for a moment, but pushed it. A giant light flared at the top, but seemed to do nothing more. Again, I turned to leave, and then stopped when I heard something carried to me on the wind. I turned, and shocked, saw that in the distance there was an object approaching. A large one, shaped like the Dev Aveza, which is exactly what it turned out to be. I have so many questions now. How did the ship get here? How did this button call it? Will this help prevent others from trying to steal my ship when they learn I can come here and summon it back to deal with them personally anytime I wanted? The one question that was answered was the most important, however. How was I going to get down from the tower without having to hike overland and back through Darklight Tower again? No longer a concern. I must be getting used to heights. Or I'm trusting that the Aveza won't fall out of the sky, because I didn't even think about how terrified I should be until halfway through my flight to Falkreath. Upon arrival, my plan was to make use of a museum drop point and then move on to where one of the pieces of Mehrunes' razor is to be found, before then moving on to Markarth and Morthal for the other two. The dragon I encountered as I landed at Falkreath had other plans for me. So did the trio of Dawn-God lunatics who seemed to object to my very existence. Falkreath lost several good guards today between those two threats, but I survived. So I suppose that all works out. I'll have to make mention of their bravery to the Jarl so their families can be properly compensated. The blade of Mehrunes' razor was shattered into pieces at the time the weapon was broken, but rather than putting the differing pieces of the shards in differing places, as would make sense, they are reportedly all being kept together in one place. This makes it easier for me, but were I in charge of such an operation, I would have made sure they were all as widely separated as possible. Perhaps such a thought is radical, as it certainly hadn't occurred to the current owner of these pieces, a bandit in the forests of Falkreath. Since I didn't know which bandit exactly has the pieces, I suppose I'll have to slaughter every last one of them and search the bodies. And their fort, I suppose, after it's all over. And isn't that just a shame? Perhaps the shard's owner was not quite so idiotic as I'd believed. After clearing the exterior of the bandit keep and its defenders, all of them Orzamer, I suppose I should mention, I made my way inside and cleared it as well. Not so many as I'd believed, but enough to be interesting, given the close quarters I had to deal with. None of them had the shards on them, nor did I find them in any chest. What I did find on the biggest and nastiest of the bandits was a key. Further searching revealed they had set up a vault of sorts beneath the main keep. The shards were clearly visible, and had 3 poison dart traps between me and them on the straight line, and 2 swinging gate traps should I choose to try to go around. Interesting thing about dart traps, though, you have to time them just right in a setup like this, otherwise they miss entirely. So the question was, what speed did the trap maker think a person would be going? The thrill of being this close to an object of potential power? I suspected they would assume that such a thief would be running. So I walked through the tripwires, and watched with amusement as the darts hit the walls and fell to the ground harmlessly. Moments later, the shards were in my possession, and I left for Markarth.